So this is, thank you, Mary. This is also a celebration, but a bit different one. We're gonna be celebrating our failures, and we're gonna talk about how to celebrate our failures and how to change the narratives around learnings with Michael and Andres. This session is gonna be co-hosted by our two amazing members, and which also came together in a previous Conversation Café. So it's really exciting for us. And if we briefly talk about the Conversation Café rules, you can already start connecting by writing your name, your organization, or your country in the chat, like Teddy did. Teddy is again on the move, as always, I guess. And if possible, please, it's better if you keep your cameras on, of course. If not possible, we understand. And please don't forget that it is a conversation place, so we want it to be interactive as possible. So if you have any comments, questions, raise your hand and unmute yourself, or if you're not able to speak, you can put it in the chat as well. But please try to join to our conversation. And I don't want to take too much of their time, so I'm gonna pass it to Andres and Michael to introduce themselves and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ira. Nice to see you all. Catalytic 2030 family. Super happy actually to be hosting this last Conversation Cafe of the year. Following a little bit as well the celebrations from the great General Assembly yesterday. So we continue actually. Hi, Pauline. I hope all is good. Great to be actually talking about celebrations, but also how do we celebrate failures. A little bit about myself, Andrés Roure Cuzzoni, Argentinian, saying hi from sunny Johannesburg, South Africa. It's very hot actually the summer here so far, so good times. I'm actually the co-founder of STRIVE, which is a tech for good startup that works mostly supporting organizational learning, programmatic learning, and operational learning to development and humanitarian actors. So all of you, basically Catalytic 2030 members, and also challenging a little bit the ways that we do access, capture, and talk about learning. So that's a little bit about me, and I will pass the word to Michael now.
Thanks, Andres. Hello to all and welcome. Thank you for joining us. So I'm Michael Gilligan. I'm the co-founder and advisor at Seek Common Ground. And by way of background, over the past 30 years, I've worked in the social innovation sector. I launched the Teach for America program in the US state of Louisiana. I co-authored the Annenberg Challenge Grant for Los Angeles, California back in the 90s, which at the time was the largest philanthropic investment in education. After September 11th in New York City, I spearheaded the World Trade Center School Children Relief Fund. And more recently, I've managed the advocacy efforts for the Common Core state standards and the next generation science standards in education in the United States. So all of this experience led me to Seek Common Ground. At Seek Common Ground, we facilitate learning communities for organizations to collaborate on specific issues. We currently have over 50 student-led or intergenerational groups collaborating on education issues from across the United States. We're also supporting a dozen grassroots groups supporting refugees and newcomers, again, on how to navigate the US education system. In addition to this learning community process or networking, given sufficient resources, we also fund small-scale, high-impact projects to inform the learning community. I'll go into further detail on that aspect of our work a little later on. So I've got, I guess, the next 10 minutes or so of talking. So Andres, if we can go to the next slide. So So this is why we're here today, to discuss this. I think as we all experience as social change innovators, that when we seek funding from the philanthropic community or from government agencies, that they tend to reward outcomes. So even outputs like how many people did you serve and what was your intent, very transactional. And I think that we're all here today and all engaged in the work that we do because we want transformational change. So the transactional aspect of it is, I think, what we think of as the price of doing business, but we need to shift that narrative so that we can actually achieve foundational change. So we need to work through the issue of outcomes versus innovation. So on the next slide, I'll speak a little bit about that. Because, to be honest, and to be real, if we're going to achieve the SDGs, we need breakthroughs. We need massive innovation, and we're not going to get it with the status quo. And so I want to raise an example of how the status quo can be negative. And as these guys know, as the Andres, Mary, and know, I can speak, for over an hour on the Cambridge Somerville Youth Study. But just to try to break it down quickly, it was the first, it was the first really academic study of a social intervention, and it occurred in Massachusetts, in the state of Massachusetts, in the 1930s. And what it studied was the effect of out of school intervention programs for boys who lived in youth homes. And so there was a studied group, there was an intervention group, and there was a control group. And there was a long-term study of the effects of the programming for the boys who underwent the intervention, and the boys in the control group just had to report to the program every year. So over the course of 10 years, what they found was that the intervention, the work that these social service agencies did for the boys had no effect, negative or positive. But what was interesting is that a researcher went back and she, Dr. Joan McCord, she went back and studied the outcomes, the life outcomes of the boys who participated in the project 30 years later. And what she showed was kind of awful. That the boys who had the programming had worse life outcomes than the boys who were the control group. And her hypothesis was that the program set unrealistic expectations on the boys. And so that led them to have a downward spiral. And for the boys who didn't participate in the study or participate in the program, they went about their lives, so they had better outcomes. And what unfortunately happened is that the data that people used, either with good or ill intent, caused the defunding or the rescinding of funding of social service programs. But if you peel back the onion a little bit more, what the hopeful message is programs that engage in a reflective practice, such as the US program, Head Start, or even the USAID program called Collaborating Learning and Adapting, that if there's intentional reflective practice, that these can be successful. but they have to be adaptive and they need to accept that we have to learn from bad practice. So that's kind of the story of the Cambridge Somerville Youth Study. And I can go on, but the reflexive outcomes practice can lead to actually negative effects. We have to engage in transformative and reflective practice to achieve the effects. And so to do that, we need to tell better stories. And so I hope that I've got a good story to tell. So the next slide. So at Seek Common Ground, as I mentioned, in addition to networking, we run small small project funding. So one of the small project funding initiatives that we have was in 2019, we did this measurement, assessment, and accountability project. And essentially, we followed the dictates of our funder, of our funding partner, and we really wanted to advocate on behalf of the current paradigm of standardized testing. So we supported grassroots organizations to essentially publicize the benefits of standardized testing. It was a miserable failure. It didn't have positive effects. It had no effect. And in retrospect, it did not have sustainable outcomes. But what we learned from that, in the next slide, is that we applied what we learned in our next project, which was the COVID-19 community-led recovery project. What we learned from our failure with the measurement, assessment, and accountability project was that we needed to give agency to local groups. And we need to let their ideas, as opposed to our ideas, run the show, be the lead of the projects. And so we gave them maximum flexibility. We did not intervene in telling them that your solutions to how you deal with COVID and the social reckoning following the murder of George Floyd, how you determine how to respond is up to you. We're not going to dictate how you do this. And so by doing that, by providing them this agency, and also by allowing them or providing them a forum to collaborate and to commiserate with one another, we got unbelievable effects. So this shift in strategy was transformative both for them and for us as an organization. So I think if you go to the next slide, that will illuminate it. So some of the projects, and you can, as you can read from the slide, some of the projects led to really significant carry-on work that is going on to this day. And internally, the practice that we changed was living at the value that determinations made at the local level are the best ways to solve or to provide solutions to the SDGs and to the change that we seek. So the adaptability, the flexibility, and the trust, I think, are essential components that we only gain by learning from our failures. And so I think with that, I can hand it over to Andres to talk about some of the fascinating work that they're doing at STRIVE.
Thank you so much, Michael. I don't know if before I continue, I don't know if any member would like to post any questions or comments or clarifications, particularly on the two examples, very interesting, by the way, that Michael has presented.
I think they're still really attentive, but Guys, in case you have any questions, feel free to write them on the chat all the time.
Awesome.
Kira and me will be checking. And of course, if you want to speak, which is also super, super nice, you can always raise your hands or tell us that you'd like the word. Thank you. Back to you, Andres.
Thank you, Mary. So basically a little bit on the two examples or even failures actually that Michael just shared. The idea of the second part of the presentation is just to focus a little bit on particularly one of the key things that you actually ended up with, Michael, is how to really create space and the trust to talk about failures. So now a question first to you, Michael, just to bring a little bit up the floor and do a little bit of an icebreaker on actually reflecting a little bit. What do you think were the factors that help or even hinder this kind of openness to failure from your perspective for the common ground? And how could you actually mention they were actually key on learning from these specific projects?
Thanks, Andres. So what really hindered our progress was we made assumptions on the donor intent, on what our funders we thought wanted from us. And we relayed that to the people that we supported. So we put blocks on how they could advance their work because we thought that the funders would not be copacetic or understanding of that. So that was on us. But with the pandemic, that provided with the as we all experienced the pandemic, it was world changing. So there was the flexibility, there was the recognition that we needed to develop innovative solutions to what we were undergoing. So that freedom was, I think, the key driver for us to be able to learn from our failure.
That's a great example. I think freedom and but also I would say leadership as well, or even the organizational culture to adapt and really embrace even that kind of flexibility and changes. But also now I will open up the floor perhaps for other members of today's Conversation Cafe, if you would like to reflect a little bit on even some thoughts of which specific factors could help, or actually the organizations or programs that you're actually working for hinder or capitalize or actually facilitates organizational learning from failures. Any reflections on this? I'm not seeing the chat, but if not, I'm more than happy just to walk you through a little bit of the examples that actually I put together for today. One of the key things, exactly as you mentioned, Michael, I think one of the key things that we need to focus on is on the organizational culture. That can, and when we talk about organizational culture, can be, of course, at the very organizational level, but it can also be at a team level. It can be a project level. So first of all, reflecting on the question, do we really have a team or an organization that allow the space to talk about failures? So one of the key important factors that we actually have seen on creating this reflection or even failing forward even is about leadership. Having importance leadership in creating the space, as actually we're actually now sitting at least for an hour, creating the space to see, hey, we actually implemented this program, we learn about this, we failure about X, is extremely important. And a good example of an organization that actually has been doing that since 2015 is the Canadian branch of Engineers Without Borders. They actually have been pioneering since many years this failure report. So their annual report actually is a failure report where actually they openly discuss and present what actually did not work in their project of implementation. And that, of course, have allowed them to really capitalize on lessons learned, but also, of course, making sure that they would not make that kind of mistakes again, and also share it. And that's also the important about the reporting and dissemination, because it's also about sharing actually what didn't work, just to make sure that also other organizations and partners do not actually make the same kind of mistakes and learn from them. So that is definitely a good practice. And also, as I was mentioning about creating the space or innovative ways to also share failures. This is very well known on the startup kind of ecosystem, with actually having failure festivals. This is also something that is being done by some international NGOs as well. And actually I was chasing Hira and Mary about yesterday General Assembly, that it was actually celebrating lessons learned, celebrating best practices, but also celebrating the failures, because failing forward actually is a super important learning, and also creating the space for that to be discussed, particularly in a digital or even physical space, is crucial. So let's see if actually next year we could organize a Failing Forward Catalytic 2030 event. That would be great. Because also these practices allowed not only, of course, the capturing the reflection and at organizational or team or programmatic level to have the culture to talk about this, but it's also about how to share it specifically with partners and key stakeholders. And last is also a question a little bit more related what we're also trying to do at STRIVE with developing, digital tools to support these organizational learning and programmatic learnings. But also, how do you think, and this is definitely an open question for you, on how can digital tools, so technology, softwares, could support on organizational learning from failures? Do you think can be an enabler? Do you think can be a blocker? And how also sometimes leaving it up to a specific digital tool, particularly when we're talking about AI, it could be more biased or more unbiased in terms of how do we analyze the trends, how do we present the results. So a little bit also for you, like an open question to give your thoughts on how do you think digital tools could support this process or could hinder the process of learning from failures. What do you think? Pauline, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, members. Pauline Bashonga from Adit Foundation, operating in Uganda, Pamanja Refugee Settlement. Actually, I think the learning from failures, I really have an experience on this. I remember we have a livelihood project, a collaboration project that has been working on the perspective of livestock, small animals, rabbits, and at a certain point, we have been challenged by the process of keeping these rabbits in the community with our community groups, and it reached a point when we had to treat them. There were some affected disease that affect the animals, but at a certain point, the veterinary whom we have been using had a challenge to arrive at the site and treat the animals. But after engaging a different veterinary to treat the animals, I don't know what happened, but almost 80% of the small animals died. And it was a kind of a failure of the project. But it reached a point we gathered all members and tried to understand why this happened. So I think Andrew was talking about the enabling environment that allow people to learn from failures. And from failures, we understood that the people that that do work in a project, they have what I may say, they have a kind of disappointment at a certain level of the project. Mostly, let me talk about some of the CBOs or community-based organizations that have limited resources. They say they have a kind of disappointment of fear of achieving the project, and that fear sometimes cause some kind of disorganization, and the people are not focused. They are not focused, and the mistake comes from that misfocusment. So it is a kind of learning perspective on that. But on the side of the tools to enable also the learning process, the digital tools, I may say that they are very important. One in a recording way that
we just miss you, Pauline, when you were just top notch on your sentence.
Oh no, maybe he's having some...
on that.
There we go. You're back. You're back, Pauline. Sorry. You were just saying about the importance of digital tools and you get cut off somehow. I don't know if you can still hear us. Great example.
Are you
actually.
getting me?
There you go. Now we can. I think it was a great example, the one that you mentioned, particularly talking about fear, opposite from trust. What I was actually mentioned from Michael is related actually exactly to that individual or organizational level on how to really build the trust, not only in between teams at organizations, but also as you mentioned, Michael, sorry, with the donor, because after all, the whole reporting accountability, particularly for organizations in our sector, still a big issue, and the whole power dynamics around pushing for a more rosy picture, let's put it that way, in the sector, not really saying this didn't work, or particularly in your case that you were mentioning of livestock dying, but it's like what actually have caused this, why, and how we actually can make sure that the next funding rounds, this doesn't happen. So I don't know if that was reported or not, but imagine if in the case that it was, we're talking about actually also from the donor perspective to make sure that there is actually some mitigation mechanisms or some kind of risk that could be actually mitigated during the implementation of programs. That's a very good example, Pauline. Thank you so much.
Andres, there are also some interesting comments in the chat. So Disha was saying digital tools might help in understanding the failures, analyzing, and probably helping to assess as well. And Naomi was saying on the front of AI that is founded on data and web crawling, this might be tricky, as you said, because data fed in can be inaccurate and results may not always be reflective of actual outcomes. She also adds, digital tools, if used responsibly, can always create better efficiencies and effectiveness, and thus enable scale.
Very nice comment, Naomi. Completely agree, because that is also related to the next slides is going to be focusing a bit on how, sorry, before I go, I see another hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Collins from Youth Initiative Development Program. There is something that I would like to echo in regards to how digital tools support in learning from organizational failures. Fear is one of them, like you've mentioned, but there is one thing that I would like to stress, because when on data perspective, because digital tools normally do an interpretation of the data that we collect, and sometimes when we key in wrong information, sorry for that. When we key in wrong information, it may give a wrong interpretation, which may mislead decision making for the organization. So I would just want to echo, however much we stress on the stress, which has really revolutionized on how we make decisions in our organizations, but also how we tap in this information really matter. We really need to know how best we can tap in this information to help us in making the right decisions for our progress as an organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such a interesting contribution, because that's also the thing about digital tools, particularly with the whole transformation that we're also experiencing with AI, which we don't need to forget that all the input that we're actually giving has to still be human. So the human error is also there, but also, as you were saying, the whole analysis and the biases still unfortunately reflected on specific tools. So it's also about how to see them as an alternative. I completely agree, but also potentially could be a driver, particularly if you're talking about, yes, analyzing a lot of data. The example that I actually mentioned is also, as you can see on the slide, mostly focusing on how first of all, the utilization of the usage of digital tools, first of all, gives a whole data-driven culture. So we're talking about also the organizational or team or project culture, just to also any kind of decision, any kind of intervention is justified, evidence with data. So that's not only for the transparency and accountability part, but also saying we're actually making this kind of decision. We're adapting, as you were mentioning, Marco, on your COVID-19, on your COVID project. That is also, you basically, based on the evidence and the information that you got from the program, so you were actually data driven, how you actually adapting and moving forward, or even failing forward. So first of all is the adaptation of that data driven culture. And particularly the example, of course, and many in the humanitarian sector, particularly when we need real-time adaptations, and time is actually super important, particularly when we're talking about catastrophes and interventions that actually do need assistance straight away. It's been actually found that using digital technologies, call it AI, call it drones, or even real-time analytics like OpenStreetMaps, to really localize the communities that actually need more of the support and in a more efficient way, or have to actually manage projects, but also learn in real time. And most of those learnings, particularly when we're talking about humanitarian interventions, come from failures. So saying, okay, we actually found that specifically distributing food or shelter at this specific time of the day was actually discriminating a specific kind of population, for example. So when we talk about logistics in the international development or humanitarian sector. And that has been actually so far proved. There is unfortunately not much research, because when we talk about the digital revolution, particularly AI, there is not much robustness or studies that actually can really prove that the use of AI and trend analysis and data will improve actually evidence decision making. But it's also what is interesting, and that is how digital tools can be a little bit an enabler for organizations that actually are not really open to discuss failures. How actually the tool can be definitely a door, an opportunity to actually start capitalizing on this data-driven and analysis on what really works and what doesn't. Not taking much of the time. I don't know if there is any specific questions on this, but considering the 15 minutes left that we have, I would like just to give the word a little bit to Michael to reflect a little bit on the key questions that we would like actually to continue throughout the cafe.
Thanks, Andres. And looking at the number of participants, I had communicated with Hira. I don't think we need to go to breakout rooms. I think we can just continue the discussion, with our group.
I completely agree.
But it's just to Andres' point, and what you said, Colin, that was so powerful to me is that fear. And Collins, you also supported upon this point, like that there's a basis in fear of reporting authentic outcomes. So I think like we can go a little off script, be free range in having a group discussion on these key questions, and just to illuminate them again, like the concept that Andres introduced of failing forward. How can we make the case for that collectively? Because with collective power, we can change the narrative, we can shift the narrative. And then, an element of that is, as in shifting the narrative, it's got to be based, as Andres just pointed out, with all the wonderful tools that STRIVE currently has, and is open to developing, that we can authentically determine outcomes. And because we all have to pay the bills, at the end of the day, how do we do this without suffering negative repercussions? Like going back to my Cambridge Somerville youth study, like at the end of the day, there were, so much investment to support like a failure that we didn't learn from. If we're going to fail forward, we've got to have outcomes that we can demonstrate are beneficial. So on that note, I think we can just open the floor for your comments and considerations on these questions, and also your own. Throw them in. So this is a Conversation Cafe. Please contribute as you determine and is beneficial to you.
I was thinking, first of all, thank you so much. This has been like eye-opening. We were chatting with Hira, like, wow, like there's so many things going on, like things that start to emerge that we want to try out, we want to understand more. I'm so curious about a lot of things. And I was thinking about the following. In many times I feel like we assess like the outcomes, either failures or things that we want to celebrate, from the organization itself. And I'm wondering how important would it be to include also, when we do a failure forward report, all the beneficiaries. Of course, in the example they gave us about the animals, we wouldn't be able to include the animals, but include all the other people in the community, all the other stakeholders that participated, because I'm thinking that sometimes maybe we think of something as a failure, but there might be a learning coming from that if only we open up those questions or those conversations.
100%. I couldn't agree more, Mary, and it's all about also how do we frame those failures. That's also the thing. If we tend, and at least with my experience working for different NGOs, again, trying to really tell a good story, be good with the donor so we can get further funding, that is perfect. But sometimes also then new programs are being developed. So the whole tendering process is based also on the stories that we're actually telling as implementers. So it's like a vicious cycle of not really telling the full story, unfortunately, on how actually failures could contribute. And a little bit on the question, on the second question that I think is super important, on how can we determine these outcomes is also about not only the reporting part, so it's also playing our role and really making sure that those failures are reported, are discussed, and also hopefully there will be remediation or they will be actually improved later on. But it's also about the funding that comes with it. Because if we actually, as a Catalytic 2030 movement, we actually start seeing that it actually many members that actually are willing to talk about failures, that actually we talk about a failure report, how that can be actually the building basis to say flexible funding of X% is needed in development of humanitarian programs to actually focus or remediate these kind of failures that we actually find on failing forward and adaptations. So it can be actually the start of failing forward movement even on how we can actually do things differently and even make a little bit of noise to donors and say, this is actually necessary. But I would like to hear more from other members to see if they have actually any kind of ideas or practices that they would like to share with us and see actually how we can focus particularly on the third question, that adjust these practices without being penalized. And the penalization is always financial, huh? But over to you.
Well, seeing no hands raised at this point, and please, by all means, collect your thoughts. But such a great question from you, Mary. And one thing that we did with our COVID-19 community-led recovery work is we engaged in the theory of participatory action research. So much of public opinion research is created at agencies or public relations firms. So we flipped that on its head. So we went to the people who were affected by the programming of our supported projects, and we asked them to evaluate the projects. So they participated, and it was active. Like, we want to know how these projects impacted your lives. And so we want you to design the questions, and we want you to, use your voice and set the priorities of the programs going forward. And it was a tremendous benefit, both to provide agency to the participants and for the projects and for my host organization to learn from one another. And that agglomerated power, that collective power, is a good way of presenting the case to funders, so that you mitigate the potential negative outcomes of the project. So, so it's a no-lose proposition.
Completely agree. But I will be really keen actually to hear more insights or thoughts actually from some of you guys. Just also to see how we can actually create, particularly at this space, meaning about being Catalytic 2030 members, how we can actually even create more safe spaces, if you want to put it that way, to really discuss this, capture this, and disseminate it in a way to make sure that also other, stakeholders and partners do not actually make the same kind of mistakes. It's really interesting what you mentioned about the participatory action review, because that is also sometimes, in my opinion as well, is what we tend to forget when we talk about the implementation of programs. We report, but not really representing, unfortunately, the voice, as you also mentioned, Mary, of the latest beneficiaries. Is mostly very high level. And those are actually the ones that perhaps actually keep actually failing, because we don't even provide the space to really understand what was their experience, what actually worked, what didn't. So more than happy, particularly if there is any grassroots organization here or member, just also to reflect on how that can be a little bit changed and not seen talking about failures as a super Western kind of approach, but how should we turn things around? Because unfortunately, the narrative is like that.
Yeah, to your point, Andres, Tracy, if you're comfortable illuminating your chat remarks, I think that would be really helpful. That'd be great for you to tell the story behind your thoughts.
I think we have a shy audience today.
Yeah.
No worries, Tracy. Just mentioned that she's in a
Yeah.
noisy area,
Right.
but it's very interesting actually what you had mentioned. Naomi, I really like your suggestion actually.
Yeah.
To start. Yeah, I really like the and being a little bit anonymous because as you were saying, trust needs to be built first. Not everyone feels comfortable about actually talking about this, but we will definitely actually could explore how perhaps through a mentee or any kind of survey really start creating the space and the floor to discuss about this kind of crowdsourcing information on what kind of key failures or themes around failures we could identify that can be actually related to some of exactly the working groups that are already created through Catalyst 2030, and perhaps capitalize on those themes and see how we can actually discuss about failures and even convert these conversations cafe into, as they call it on the startup world, it's like a fuck up cafe. It's actually, they do it, huh? I'm startup world. I attended some of them in the Netherlands when I was living there. Is the way, and honestly talking about how actually fucked ups are actually learnings. So it's also creating the trust and creating the space to talk about those, huh? We can actually rename it a little bit, but yeah, I love that suggestion indeed. Any other idea, members, that you might have to yes, but any other idea that you would have to motivate and create a space of trust, first of all, to talk about this, because I think it will be a super interesting initiative looking forward the next year, how we can actually create actually space for this, huh?
I'm gonna see if this works as yesterday. There goes Mauricio, because he usually has a lot on his mind. There he's writing on the chat. Thank you, Mau.
Thank you, Mauricio. I just actually read the comment. Thank you for joining. I think there's actually some interesting action points from our side, and also challenge a little bit also the group left, and also looking at the time, just to change a little bit sometimes the way that we name things as easy as taxonomy, you know, how perhaps, you know, a rebirth of this falling forward, or even failure cafe, it could be amazing. And I think we can even run up a survey just to seek for volunteers, and I'm sure there will be people actually willing to talk about this and really capitalize. I really like that. And also, ideally, as you were saying, if we divide it by themes and having specific questions related to those themes, it will be insightful, because then is when we are actually capitalizing on our super amazing knowledge that we have in this community, guys. Huh? So on that note, thank you, everyone.
I second all the this was a really dynamic discussion, although some of it was on text, and that's fine. So I'm so thankful to all of you for participating, and for me, just having the opportunity to learn from your experiences and to collaborate with the Catalyst team and with Andres and his team. So I thank you all, and I hope you have a great December season, however you may celebrate it. And and I guess this will probably be my last Catalyst 2030 interaction until the new year.
Yeah. And it's very briefly also, encouraging, I have a very nice cooperation with Michael. We actually met in a Conversation Café. And all the topic about this Conversation Cafe came out in an informal discussion. So I really embrace members to, to connect, to organize this kind of like co-hosting sessions, because it's also very a learning experience also for myself to just get to know another member better, what they are doing, and actually presenting together is definitely an amazing experience. So I encourage all of you to reach out, co-host, and have many fuck ups, learning sessions, or knowledge cafe, or failures. We name it, but let's definitely keep learning. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you both so much. It was indeed a great conversation as always, and we will make sure that we're going to continue with the fuck up sessions conversations and we're going to make sure to include all the participants from today to the conversation as well. So we continue by growing and have many conversation cafes like this. So we wish you the happy end of the year, and I guess it's kind of the end, like last session for everyone of the year. So happy holidays, I guess. And thank you so much, Andres and Michael, again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy
Oh,
holidays.
Magamba, so nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you, Magamba. Bye.
Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye. Yeah, it has been nice pleasure learning from each other.